The vast majority of the content for the new Dwarves of Runenberg DLC for the last spell came in the form of perks, be them perks added by weapons, perks added for the new race of dwarves, or perks that came on stone metals. We got like 20 something perks with this new update. And today we're going to talk about all of them, the ins and outs of them, the minutia and nuance of each and every one of them. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's do it. When I say it's all about the perks, I really mean it. It's kind of surprising. I was doing a bit of reflection. I was like, what video should I make next? And I was like, I don't think I even know what all of the perks that were added do or how they work. So today I spent most of the day doing science and trying to figure out how they actually work. And the truth is, some of them are very confusing. They don't work the way that I expected or hoped that they would. And so in doing that testing, I've learned a lot about what makes them good, what makes them bad, what weird interactions do they have, etc. There is certainly more science to be done, but this is kind of the first step of that process, and I wanted to create a video that just captures all of the perks and what they look like as of this moment in time. I will be giving some opinions on whether I like the perks or don't like the perks, but this will not be a tier list. That is coming later. So stay tuned for that one. I need to play with things more before I'm ready to really weigh in on how good the various things are. The first place we're going to start is with the 10 perks that came as part of the Dwarven race. The dwarves have a column, and that column has one of two options for each of the 5 tiers, totaling 10 total perks. The first of those perks in tier 1 is Jolly Drinker. Jolly Drinker is whenever a potion is used on the hero, they gain 2 movement. The way that I think of this roughly in terms of power level is it's kind of like an early game movement potion, but regardless of what potion you use, or regardless of how that potion arrives at you. Someone else can use that potion on you, and you're still going to gain movement. But it's nice to have another skill that restores movement, even if this one is a little limited. You don't get a lot of uses out of potions, so you're not going to be getting a huge amount of movement out of this. It doesn't strike me as something that's like a need to have for a momentum hero or something like that, but early game, if you're struggling with movement because you have a dwarf and they don't have a lot of movement, this can be a handy pickup in the early game, and there isn't a huge amount of competition at the tier 1 level. After that, we get to Body Count Contest. I still don't understand this one. There was some discussion in the Ishtar Discord about this. The devs were kind of like asked, how does this work? And I think that what's a community member of mine told me, and I thought that it was very funny, is they said that it may have raised more questions about how the XP system works in general than it answered specifically about body count. But I'll give my best guess of the way that it works. Basically, what I think happens is if you have 2 heroes on the same side of the map, relatively close to each other, within 12 tiles, if one of them kills an enemy, they will get 20% more experience from the specific kill XP that was given to the hero. For context, in the last spell, there are 2 types of XP that every hero gets. There is the shared XP pool, and that's for what the kills that other people got, or the kills that Ballista got, or Catapults got. And then there is the specific XP that they got for their kills. So I assume that that works. And I think the quality of body count contests is going to matter based on a variety of factors, but the largest of which is this hero going to be co-located with other heroes? And I think that largely stems from, are the maps pushing you in that direction? Certain maps, you have all of your heroes on one side early more frequently than others. Like Glenwell spreads you out and spreads you thin pretty quickly, whereas like Runenberg, the early knights do a pretty good job of allowing you to keep some of your heroes together as you're pressing forward. Overall, though, it's a tier 1 perk that's giving you a bit more XP. It's probably okay without being on the same level as like Avid Learner, which is a fantastic tier 2 perk. Next up, we have Thickness. We know that dwarves are thick, but how thick are they? So basically what this is every 9% damage that your hero has, very interesting percentage there, you will get 4% resistance. Another way to think about this is that basically you'll be getting 50% of your damage as resistance in rather significant chunks. I think it's a pretty strong perk, actually. I don't have a lot of complaints regarding the way that this works. It seems like for tank style heroes, you're potentially going to get a fair amount of resistance by investing in damage, which is a stat that we all want to invest in. There is also the potential that I will mention here that if you are abusing Warcry, you might get a lot of value out of this. You might get a lot of resistance on your tankier heroes from this if you're picking up, say, I don't know, 40 or 50% damage straight up just from Warcry proccing along with Blessing. So, interesting. I don't think it's going to be a run-defining perk. I think I might pick it up occasionally, but it's going to have stiff competition at the level 2 because it's going to be paired with either probably Bodybuilder or Spiky Counter. Then we have Carnage. Carnage looks sleeper very strong. The first piece of science that we have done is that regardless of how many enemies you hit in a turn, it can never trigger more than once. So basically, if you hit 5 enemies in a single attack or more, you will get 1 movement point back and you will get 5% damage for 2 turns. And that second piece is potentially very strong because over the course of a turn with a multi-hit hero, you could stack up a fairly large amount of damage while also recouping a fair amount of movement. It does benefit from Bless, so that 5% could be up to 3 turns, which I think makes Carnage probably one of the better perks out there. It is very, very strong. The fact that it exists on tier 2 is staggeringly good. I think when I see Carnage, I'm going to be very excited to play with Carnage because hitting 5 targets is not super difficult. And when you do that, having a nice bonus is a good thing. And the fact that it can stack up is icing on the cake, and it restores movement. So lots of good stuff going on here. Not something I'll pick up on momentum heroes necessarily, but on multi-hit heroes, propagate heroes, I think it could be quite strong. Moving on to the third tier, we have Hard as a Rock. Whenever an enemy is killed, gain 1 block. This is a tricky one. At tier 3, I think it is okay. The first note that I put here is that temporary block is generally a bit meh. And what I mean by that is that it's not great for your tanky heroes to be fluctuating in tankiness. You kind of need to know that they're going to be safe regardless. And so if you have a turn where you're, say, like wailing on a Dwarven statue on Runenberg, and you don't end up securing a lot of kills, and let's say you lose 10 to 15 block, and that actually makes a meaningful difference for your hero, that's a little scary. That being said, the flip side of it is early on in tier 3, maybe Hard as a Rock is good enough, and you're going to pick up 10 to 15 block, maybe 20 block on a good day from it. It does benefit from Bless, so you could use this as your primary source of block and maybe invest more in other stats rather than investing in block. But I do think there's a lot of micromanagement to remembering how much block you've gained. So I don't know. Kind of a mixed bag. I'm not really excited by the way that this one is designed, but having a source of block is okay. I also didn't mention it here, but capping block is not uncommon. You only need to get to 100 block to cap, and you have so many sources of block between shields and defensive armor stat buffs and all these other things that can potentially give you a lot of block. It is competing with Look at My Muscles, which is 2 action points, and it essentially makes you a nudist, which means that it disables your body armor slot. The chest slot gives a lot of stats, and it gives you a lot of defensive capacity. So it is expensive. This is an expensive perk to pick up. I will say 2 AP is also potentially a lot, especially at tier 3. You're potentially getting a like 1/3, 33% increase in your total AP, which can feel like a lot. But I think especially in the end game, you're going to have a lot of other sources of AP. So it might not be that useful. And it might be one of those things that you kind of like pick up like Initiator, where initially it feels really good. And by the end of the run, it's more of a downside than an upside because you're getting a lot of perks from the chest slot. So overall, I don't expect anybody taking a look at my muscles that much, but I do appreciate the art on it. And I think that it is thematically kind of a fun one for a dwarf. Moving on to tier 4, we have a very interesting perk in Emergency Tunnel. It unlocks the Emergency Tunnel skill, allowing your hero to teleport to a haven tile. It can be used from anywhere, a range we do not see often. It has one target, it has 2 uses per night, and it can only be used once per turn, and it is a maneuver with no momentum. Basically, it is just a free teleport to any haven tile, which is super cool. The 2 uses per night is difficult for me to wrap my mind around. You kind of use it up, and then you're like, wow, it's gone. And you just spent a tier 4 perk on something that is potentially gone quite quickly. It can be very impactful if you reserve it for those important times, but it can also have this kind of like too good to use syndrome where you're like, oh, I have to save Emergency Tunnel for later just in case I need it. The feedback that I would give on Emergency Tunnel is I would have liked to see more health cost and no limit to uses. So basically, it's a hard choice because maybe you're losing 40 or 50 hit points, you're losing a third of your hit point pool, but you can move around. I think that where that would become problematic is on something like a Blood Mage who can recoup a lot of hit points. You could have a Blood Mage that is just everywhere all the time. But that feels like kind of a fun power fantasy, just someone like tunneling around like crazy the whole time. It is a cool perk. The limited uses per night makes it feel like one that I probably won't take too frequently, but it's nice to have in your hip pocket, especially for low mobility heroes who say need to transfer from one side to the other if things aren't going well or a hero dies. So not all bad and not the best, kind of a middle of the road perk. It goes up against You're Next, which is every 2 enemies hit, minus 12% resistance for 2 turns to a random enemy within range 6. It's an interesting perk. It really is. So first of all, 2 hits is relatively low in the grand scheme of things. And since it's 2 enemies hit, with multi-hit, you could potentially stack up a huge number of debuffs with this, with say a hand crossbow with a bunch of multi-hit. Hand crossbow with a bunch of multi-hit specifically, you could be getting 3 procs of this every AP you spent on the primary attack, which is a lot of debuffs getting put out there. You do have to be within range 6 of the things that you are debuffing. This is not range 6 of the enemy that was hit. It is range 6 of the hero. The disadvantage of this is that the debuff can land on something that doesn't have any resistance. So I don't think it's consistent for debuffing resist, but it does proc Sadist, which could be a very strong thing. You could potentially be getting even more Sadist procs by spreading resistance out there. It would also benefit from Hex and last a little longer, although I don't think that's terribly useful. One thing I didn't note here that literally just in this moment occurred to me, but is worth mentioning, is this is another source of negative resistance. So like the Tome, this is going to be a damage multiplier. Even if it lands on something that has 0% resistance, it can send them negative like the Tome did. So I think this is actually more interesting than I initially gave it credit. I don't believe the range is skill range modifiable, so it's still a little awkward because you have to be pretty close to the stuff when you use it, but this seems like hand crossbow's best friend in a nutshell. More interesting than I initially thought. I'm actually excited to play with You're Next in the context of future runs and kind of see if it works as well as I'm suspecting that it might. Could be fun on Sadists, could be fun on multi-hit heroes. Moving into the tier 5s. The tier 5s are pretty exciting. I'm not going to lie. I think both of them have some interesting things. The first of them is Warcry. For every 20 missing armor or health, gain 1% damage for 1 turn to all of your heroes at the start of your turn. This is cool. I've already played with this once in a run. I think the run actually went live today, but the way that this works is really interesting. If you have a hero that has a lot of health and you have a way to drain that health, you can potentially stack up some pretty big buffs on all of your other heroes and your primary hero as well. It is compatible with Bless, so you can double the benefit of it using Bless. Every single one of your heroes that is receiving this buff will get it for 2 turns because your one hero has Bless. So that requires 2 tier 5 perks, but if you get them, that can be pretty powerful. You can create a hero with a big health pool and a small, and then whittle their health way down and essentially turn them into this kind of like weird Energizer bunny that's energizing all of your heroes, which I think is fun. I did it with cannon and a longbow with a hero and got to the point where I was rolling about 40% damage on all my heroes as a result of doing this, which is a huge benefit. But it's not the biggest benefit because you can do this. By the back of the envelope math that I did is you could get about 45% damage per turn times 2 because of Bless on 6 heroes, which does not equal 810 damage to the party. It equals something else. I'll put the actual number down on the screen somewhere when we get to it, but it's still a lot of percentage damage increase. It might be a bit of a meme build, but I don't know. I think there might also be something to it. I think you probably have to go organic armor to really get your health pool big enough, and then you don't have the armor to protect you from, random hits and those types of things. But it might be fun to play around with. I want to play more with Warcry. Its counterpart is Heart of the Party, which is every 200 damage inflicted, excluding overkill damage to enemies, gives +3 armor again to the entire party for 2 turns, also modifiable by Bless up to 3 turns. This adds up surprisingly well. I took this on a couple of multi-hit heroes, and I had all of my heroes with like 300 extra armor, which, if you know anything about 300 extra armor, generally makes your heroes very, very resilient. The exclusion of multi-hit makes it a little hard to use with like heavy hitters. Wouldn't be good on a momentum hitter as an example, but on high output multi-hit heroes, there's a bit of a theme here with some of these, but on multi-hit heroes in particular, it really adds up. You can stack up a lot of armor on all of your heroes and make them all a lot more resilient, which especially on the Runenberg boss fight can be pretty useful. So that was all of the dwarf perks. Now we're going to move on to the stone metal perks. Not so fast, past Alden. There are 2 perks that I forgot to include that I only realized that I had missed when I was editing this video, hence the new t-shirt and the different day. The first of those perks is Tossable Fellow, and the reason that I forgot it is because it doesn't actually show up in the perk interface at all. Instead, it is a replacement to the jump over skill that is innate to all humans, which allows them to traverse walls or various other obstacles. And in place of it, dwarves have the ability to be tossed by an ally. They need to be co-located with an ally within 2 blocks of that ally, and then they can be tossed up to 5 blocks. And the reason it's a shame that I missed it is because this is an amazing skill. This is a really fun component of dwarves, and I love tossing them. It's also a good reminder because if you leave a dwarf outside of your base and you didn't build any gates, they literally aren't going to be able to get in without the help of someone, which is kind of humorous to think about as well. Overall, it is a very strong mobility skill, and ironically, it kind of creates the ultimate leapfroggery. You can have a dwarf toss a dwarf 2 tiles, and then have the other dwarf toss them an additional bunch of tiles. So it's really fun, the interactions that you get. The only thing that I kind of perhaps wish for it, and maybe this could only be on the improved version, we'll talk about in a second, but I kind of wish it had an escalating cost, so you can maybe use it twice per turn, but the second time it costs an AP. But Tossable Fellow is indeed a fun skill. Then there is the upgrade, and this takes the place of Leapfrog. So you won't find it in the dwarf column, you'll instead find it in one of the miscellaneous columns, and that is really Tossable Fellow. This makes the toss go further. Now you can toss the dwarf up to 6 range because obviously they're more aerodynamic. They're probably cone-headed dwarves if I had to guess. And also you can use it from within 4 tiles rather than within 2 tiles. And that second one is particularly important because the 4-tile range makes this so much more usable. Basically, 4 tiles is a surprisingly long distance compared to 2 tiles, which basically means you're standing on top of the other one. Of interest, because this lands in the miscellaneous columns, I have actually found it kind of hard to find with good reliability because there are only 2 slots where it can pop up from a much longer list of potential perks that can show up there, as opposed to, say, things in the dwarf column, which is a 50-50 of having it. But overall, really Tossable Fellow feels like an insta-lock from my perspective because tossing dwarves is fun, and this gives you a lot of flexibility anytime your hero is duoing. So now we've covered all of the actual perks in this video from the DLC, not all -2, and now we can move on to start talking about stone metal perks. And there are 13 of these, and I had to go buy all of them. So that took a fair amount of my day as well, but it was absolutely worth it. So the first of them is Earthquake Strike. Earthquake Strike is every 6 enemies hit, apply stun, 100% chance for 1 turn to all adjacent enemies. First big thing, adjacent to the caster, not to the enemy's hit. For the longest time, I was like, this isn't working. I just keep cycling through and nobody's getting stunned. And the reason was that it was trying to stun, and because this works best with a multi-hit hitting lots of things enemy, it wasn't proccing on anyone because no one was standing next to me. Eventually, I ran my multi-hit hero into the crowd and was like, oh, okay. It stuns things occasionally. I don't know if the stun is improved by the stats on heroes. I would assume that it is, but that a little more science needs to be done there. It does not affect the next attack. It procs when you've done that number of hits, so that's a slight typo there. But yeah, it's a very interesting one. There's another skill that we're going to get to, Don't Move. That's the one that procs on next attack, and I think I got the two confused for a moment. But this one's interesting. I don't know how you use this effectively. I guess you have to have a hero that's running around in the crowd, killing things far away, stunning the crowd. It's kind of a funky thing, might be useful, probably not a trinket that I'm going to pick up too frequently just because of how contested trinket slots are. Next, we have Fear of Death. Whenever an enemy is hit, gain 5% crit. Landing a critical hit resets this bonus. This is an interesting one. So it seems relatively strong on heroes that do not collect any crit. So maybe on a Blood Mage, this would be a nice thing to pick up because every once in a while you'll have like a guaranteed or near guaranteed crit. It increases the frequency with which you're going to crit. If you take an absolutely no critical, you're guaranteed to get a crit every 20th hit, which is, or no, excuse me, not every 20th. Yeah, no, every 20th hit. So I don't know, there's kind of like a funky middle ground, but if you've really dumped crit and you have 0% crit, this could be a useful way to get a bit of crit. On heroes that have a lot of crit, it basically does nothing. It has kind of no positive effect. So it lives in kind of a weird realm. I'm going to have to play with it more to see how effective it is. It seems like it would mostly be useful in the early game, but you don't get medals like this in the early game. So I'm not exactly sure what its target audience is. We'll need to figure it out. I would have loved to have seen a version of Fear Death that buffed crit power for the longer you went without getting a crit. I think that could have been very interesting. Like it would build and build and build, and then you might get this massive crit. But if you have too much crit, you wouldn't get it frequently enough, so it wouldn't have time to build. So I don't know. There might be something interesting there. But for now, Fear Death is an interesting one. I'm not sure exactly how to use it. Next up, we have Against the Wall. Whenever the hero is adjacent to a building, defense, or obstacle, gain 10% damage, increased by 2 for each level the hero has. So back of the envelope math, a level 12 hero is going to be getting about 34% damage from this. Doesn't seem terrible. It's essentially the offensive version of back protection, which is curious to say the least. And I could imagine a good trinket with lots of nice stats on it, also coming with like 30% damage if you're standing next to a wall or a tree or something like that, being pretty darn good. It's just kind of free stats. It's not incredible. But it's, you know, an extra 30% damage occasionally that you can kind of play around. I don't mind it. Next, we have Shower of Blows. Whenever an enemy is hit, plus 5% damage minus 3% accuracy, missing an enemy resets the modifier. I love this. This is like quintessentially to me such a cool concept for a trinket and such a cool concept for a perk that I'm really excited to play around with it. Basically, you keep doing more and more and more and more damage and becoming more and more and more inaccurate, and then bam, you miss and it all goes away. So it hugely rewards having a huge accuracy pool, you know, stack up to say like 30, 40, 50% accuracy. And if you get up to 30% accuracy, by the time that gets down to 0, you're doing an extra 50% damage. I think it would have benefited from being perk damage rather than regular damage. But it's a reason to overcap accuracy, and it works super well on heroes that don't mind the occasional miss. So like this is one that I'm going to have my eye out for every multi-hit hero, because you're just hitting a lot and then eventually you miss, which is not a big deal. And then it resets, but then it starts stacking up again very quickly and you go through that cycle. I think it's going to be exceptional for that. After that, we have Aggressiveness. So Aggressiveness is every 15 missing armor, you gain 3% damage for 1 turn up to 60% damage at the start of the hero's turn. I think there is an issue with this, but I don't fully know. The issue is the only time I got to play with this, I also had a hero that was doing Heart of the Party. And what appeared to happen was the Heart of the Party buff would expire first, which would essentially erase the top portion of my armor pool, which would mean that by the time Aggressiveness was calculated, there was no missing armor. Because let's say I was at 500 armor and I had lost 150. And then the 200 armor that I got from Heart of the Party went away. And then it was like, you have 300 of 300 armor. And I never got Aggressiveness to proc. That being said, I think there's a lot of problems with like if you have an armor that gives you armor or all of these things. A lot of things that buff armor temporarily, I think don't play well with Aggressiveness, but it seems like a really cool concept. And I think if some of those things are tweaked and work a little better, it could be really, really cool and really powerful. But we'll have to wait and see. For now, Aggressiveness is a little hard to work around, but I think on like a tanky hero, this could be a super fun one just to get a little bit of extra damage out of them. Seems like it would work really well on a Blood Mage with a decent armor pool, as an example. Then we have Smith's Anvil. Every 3 enemies killed gives you 2% resistance up to 50% resistance. Seems like another strong tank one, potentially. Very strong for defensive heroes. Since it accumulates over the entire night, you can kind of start out, knock down a bunch of enemies in the early game and end up very resistant. Resistance isn't a stat that I usually take in large quantities, but don't mind getting in large quantities. So I think Smith's Anvil is going to be sleeper pretty good. And I would take it on your standard tanky in need of resilience or resistance. Resilience. Whoa, that was a World of Warcraft throwback. But anyways, yes, resistance. Moving on to collateral damage. Whenever an enemy dodges, cast automatically collateral hit skill on a random adjacent enemy, where collateral hit skill is going to be doing some amount of damage buffed by your primary damage type, whichever one is your highest, and it is unblockable and undodgeable. It hits in a 2-tile radius around your hero. So this is one of those collateral damage, I don't think this word means what you think it means type of thing, because I assumed that it would be at the location where you missed. So you attack an enemy and you essentially accidentally hit a different enemy. That's the kind of textbook definition of collateral damage, but that is not the way that this works. Instead, your hero needs to be in the thick of things, missing a lot in order to really take advantage of this. There is no range mod on the skill, so I don't know that it's going to be particularly easy to build around. When I thought that it was when you miss a target, it kills one of the other targets adjacent to that target, then I was like, I think there's a build here. Go super negative on your accuracy, drink a lot of amber ale or stout ale. I can't remember which one is. The one that has negative accuracy though, so that you're missing a ton, and then just blow up everything but the thing that you're targeting. I thought it could be a super fun, super meme, silly build, but it's not going to work that way with the way that collateral hits works now. Hopefully they change that at some point. As a bit of an aside, I'm noticing this a lot. I think that right now, my theory, based on having looked at the XML files of how the game defines skills, etc., the adjacency and range really only work off of the hero location. I think that's just kind of like a code limitation of the game right now, and that's why this works the way that it works. And I hope that at some point it changes so that range can be calculated off of either destination or hero origin point. But that's enough of an aside. Collateral damage, I think it's going to be hard to make it work. Maybe you'll be able to toss it on like a blood mage and just get the occasional extra collateral hits off of them, but it needs to be someone that can live in the thick of things, some very defensive hero. And defensive builds are good, but they're not popping off like your multi-hit builds or things like that. So in the long term, they may not slip into the meta quite the way that we're hoping that they do. I hope that they do though. Like a shark. When attacking a wounded enemy, gain 100% reliability and unblockable. The no block is way more important than the reliability here. Reliability, 100% reliability is a good amount of reliability. It at least tells you, it tells you deterministically exactly whether you're going to get a kill or not get a kill. So I like that about it. You do still have to get the enemy wounded before this procs, which is not always the easiest thing. The biggest criticism I have with Like a Shark is that most enemies go from 100 to 0. Most of your cannon fodder enemies just die. And then this is really only useful for the ones that you kind of like wound down. So like when a bulky gets wounded, this becomes really good. I think this is going to be great for killing guardians because they're very high block units. Same thing with bulkies, but Like a Shark, it's interesting. Like if it's on a good trinket, I'll probably use it. And the nice thing about all of these perks is that they do come on trinkets that can have other stats. So I think there's potential for Like a Shark to just be a nice to have once in a while. And the no block is pretty good. No block comes in handy. Mood swings. They are officially entering the world of gear swapping. So mood swings is on even numbered nights, gain 3 movement points, and on odd numbered nights, gain 2 action points. Oh, and I think I got it absolutely backwards here. So I apologize, another error in the presentation. But the AP is significantly better than the movement points by a mile. And so this is not going to be active on Lakeberg, Runenberg, or Elderlicht boss knights, but it will be active on Glintfine and Glenwald, which are odd number of night maps. It is one that I will probably use when it is available on odd number nights and take off on even number nights because the AP is so much better than the move. But it's an interesting design space. I'm glad they're exploring it. Now we have Don't Move. So Don't Move was the other one that I was talking about before that is on next attack. So Don't Move loves Hex. Basically, every 8 enemies hit, the next attack will be undodgeable and will have -10 movement points. This, I can't stress how powerful this is. So first of all, the fact that it is -10 movement points for 1 turn means that Hex can make it 2 turns. It can be spread with Contagion, which is very interesting. But more importantly, because it is every 8 hits, with a multi-hit hero, you can stack it up with like 1 magic missile and bam, you have Don't Move active. And then what's crazy is your next attack, every hit of that attack will spread Don't Move. I validated this with science myself, so I know it to be true. And I think it's going to be like quite the wave stopper is all I will say on that one. Being able to drop -10 move on like 9 enemies or something like that is going to be quite fun. The only issue with it is with multi-heroes like this, you're generally just killing everything. So, you know, you could choose to say root an elite boomer or root a bulky or root a ripper or whatever it happens to be using this. And I think it will be useful. I think it'll be a fun thing to build on multi-hit heroes without being wildly powerful, but it is a great debuff. And I think I could also see some use of it with opportunist heroes. Just being able to spread a really powerful snare could be pretty fun and interesting. So Don't Move. I think it's a fun one. I'm excited to play more with it. Then we have Stoneheart Shield. Every 4 enemies killed plus 6 block up to 30, and this resets every turn. Same thing I said about Toughness, the Dwarven skill, I will say here, which is that block is easy to cap, and conditional block that is here one day, gone tomorrow is dangerous because it means that your durability is fluctuating significantly. So I think because this one is available on a trinket, if the trinket is good, I might use it on a blood mage or something of that nature. But basically, it's 30 block if you're killing 20 enemies, which most heroes by endgame should be killing 20 enemies, so you should pretty consistently be hitting the 30 block. Maybe it puts you at cap when you otherwise wouldn't have been at cap and allows you to take a little less block from level ups and a little more of something else like damage or movement or accuracy, who knows. But I think it's good, not great. I don't think we really need more sources of block. That's my gut feeling. Then we have Condensed Hate. Every 8 times a hero is hit, the next attack gets undodgeable, armor piercing, and stun 200%. This is going to be a fun one for tanks. I like the idea of Condensed Hate. I love the fact that in the game files, the official name for this perk in like the perk image file is FU in particular. Thumbs up on that one. I think that's pretty funny. It works off you being hit, not you hitting things. Seems good for tank builds just because you could like store it up and then say at the beginning of your turn, you could unleash just a absolutely massive skewer, right? The multi-hit spear attack. I think it's called skewer, not impale. I always get them confused. Or triple swipe and stun a massive field of enemies. Seems really cool. Armor piercing is great. Undodgeable is great. I think there's a lot to love there. The way to think about it in terms of value is you probably get this to proc every other turn if you have no ranged enemies on the map, and maybe every turn if you have ranged enemies and you're doing a good job keeping them close. But only time will tell. It's not insane, but it seems strong and super fun. Then we have Forge Mastery. Your first attack of each turn has 50% perk damage and 100% reliability. 100% reliability is good. We've talked about it before. You know, we all know my opinions on reliability. Generally speaking, I don't think it's the strongest stat. It is a little nice in this case just because you're also getting a big hunk of damage that you probably otherwise wouldn't get. And basically with like an initiator style build or a build where your first attack of the turn can be really strong, I think this can be good. I think this will be very strong paired with cannon because you can do that initial Armageddon and just mow down a huge amount of enemies with 50% extra damage and enough reliability to exactly know if you're killing things or not killing things. Could also be good for boss killing, right? I could see putting this on a momentum hero and having that first attack of the round against the boss just be, you know, huge because you're getting extra perk damage, for instance. I did find I had this once, and I did find that it was hard to remember to use because, you know, you have 6 heroes and you forget which one has this, and then you cast an action, you're like, oh, that was my big action. That was supposed to be a magic missile or an Armageddon or whatever it happens to be. But it does affect the totality of a multi-hit attack. So I think we like Forge Mastery. I think it's an interesting one. And again, I think the devil's going to be in the details with, can you get it on a trinket with good stats? There are only 3 more to go. Home stretch. We're on to the weapon perks. And we've talked a bit about the weapons, and we'll be doing more in-depth discussion about the weapons, but each of the weapons comes with a perk, and the perk is the thing that makes them unique. Reservoir is the perk on the gauntlet, and every 6 enemies hit with gauntlet skills, the next gauntlet skills gets 40% perk damage and +5 range. The gauntlet's in a bad place. I'm not going to dwell on that here, but the perk damage could potentially be nice, except for the fact that the gauntlet doesn't really have a great thing to apply it to, except for Geocannon, which is a little awkward. The plus range here mostly just reminds you of how abysmal the range of the gauntlet is. The one range that you start with on the gauntlet is just so hard to work around, and the skill that is supposed to be enabling Reservoir, which is Shockwave, costs 2 mana, which makes it hard to recommend and hard to use just because it is mana hungry. So yeah, hard to enable with the current set of stats. You'd have to have 2 perfect snaps to get 1 Reservoir, so not the greatest. Little bit tough to work around. Perfect Guard, on the other hand, is just fantastic. If you are playing a tanky hero, it is so much fun getting 80% perk damage from your War Shield that is decreased by 4% every time you act, which is not a big deal at all. You basically get the majority of the bonus here for the entirety of your turn, and the only problem is if you don't get hit and then this bonus gets radically shrunk. But super duper strong. The War Shield is a super fun weapon to use. I've said it before here, but I think that the War Shield just needs a little flavor, and it has the potential to be one of my favorite weapons. It's already super good. I really like it, and Perfect Guard is the reason that it is so exceptional. And then last but not least, the award for longest tooltip goes to Overheat and this tome that we have here. The short version of Overheat is basically every AP or mana that you use contributes to this heat meter. If you reach or exceed 7 heat, the cannon goes into this overheating mode where you start to have to spend health based on the action points and mana that the skill costs, and that stacks up pretty heavy. And the real gotcha is the Fire Blast. So you get a point blank AoE surrounding yourself that is range damage when you overheat, and then you use a skill on the cannon in the overheating state. The Fire Blast has destroyed gold mines of mine. It has destroyed ballistas. It is easy to forget, but it is a lot of damage, especially early game. Early game, getting into the overheating state and then using rocket jump to land somewhere and explode where you land is very strong. And because the damage is range damage, it benefits from proximity shot. So in even the late game, I could see a world in which you could be using overheating to kind of double the damage that you're doing and do a lot of damage with Fire Blast. So overheat is a kind of interesting thing. The other thing that I like about overheat is that when we were talking about the Warcry mechanic, the cannon is by far the best way to shed HP. If you want to have less HP than you currently have, which sounds weird, I know, you cast an Armageddon, and then you just cast a bunch of cannonballs, you reduce your HP significantly, and you can get yourself right into that sweet spot where you want to be, maybe around like 100 hit points, where you're not about to die, but you're also buffing the rest of your party. So a lot of interesting things going in here with Overheat. The discourse in the Discord, which shameless plug, if you aren't already a member of the Discord, join it up. But the discourse in the Discord, why can't I say that? Has been around the one piece of Overheat and the cannon that's tricky, which is that the game is very light on healing. At the moment, there are not a lot of ways to do health sustain. You have end of turn daily health regen, you have health potions, but if you're not a melee hero with vampirism, you really don't have a lot of ways to recoup health, and it would be nice to have a few more. But that's it for me. That's all your perks for the new Dwarves of Runenberg DLC. There are a lot of them. A substantial number of perks, but they all seem really cool. I think that it was very smart of the developers to lean into perks and create a lot of new perks for us. It's created a lot of new interesting ways for the game to be played and dynamics for the game itself. So 2 enthusiastic thumbs up on that one. Other than that, I don't have a lot else to say. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, we're going to be doing more content like this. And I spend a lot of time on these videos. As far as I know, this is the first video that is a comprehensive overview of all of the perks. So if you want to see all of the perks in one place, this is potentially the best channel to find content like that moving forward. I'm going to be furiously making videos over the next couple of weeks, making sure to share all of the nuances and intricacies of what I'm learning about the new DLC. And I'll also be playing the DLC live this coming week 3 times on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, starting at 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you want to join in and see what we're doing, we're going to do a lot of science. I'm going to try and get 1,000 AP on all of the weapons by the end of the week. The gauntlet is going to be agony. But if you want to see me in agony, you know where to find me. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.